thank you so much for coming. So good to see so many Heidi users. I'm Tom, so I'm one of the founders, Doctor Behind the Scenes. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evenings to come spend it with us. Hopefully it's an entertaining, fun time. Meet people from the Heidi scene. Give us all your picture requests, mugs, bugbears, everything else in person. So tonight we're going to have an amazing panel with a few different users, different parts of the healthcare system, hosted by the lovely Ben Condon, emergency registrar, clinical brand and Heidi. And yeah, just thanks so much, and I'll see you around.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome again, everyone. I just wanted to start by acknowledging that tonight we're meeting on Gadigal country, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room, I just wanted to acknowledge and extend that welcome and acknowledge we're meeting here tonight, which is great. The topic that we've been given to have a chat about is Heidi Futures, what healthcare is going to look like in 2040. And it's a big topic, but fortunately I don't have to fill in all those gaps myself. I've got an incredible panel here to kind of talk us through it. And I just want to start by introducing them and thanking them for coming tonight. On the far left, we've got Simon Cos. He's the Chief Medical Officer of Microsoft for Australia and New Zealand. Dr. Talat Upal, obstetrician gynecologist and director at the Women's Health Road. And we've got Associate Professor Angus Ritchie, who's a nephrologist and CMIO and clinical director for the digital health at Sydney Local Health District. So please make them very welcome. I'd like to start by going backwards to go forwards and thinking about maybe your Heidi origin stories and where you've each kind of first discovered Heidi, and maybe a little bit about how you maybe became comfortable with Heidi in your personal practice, or maybe what stood out for you, Simon, in terms of many scribes out in the market. So, yeah.
So, emergency not by background. I've been enamored with artificial intelligence ever since I saw those first ECGs had an automated interpretation, and I'm going back 26 years ago when I was an intern. So a long time. But we haven't really seen artificial intelligence scale. And despite working for Microsoft, when ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, totally took me by surprise. And I thought, oh my God, what is this new technology that generally understands novel use cases? Got me really excited. So I already knew Tom, and I already knew what Heidi was doing before they became known for Ania clinical scribing, which is a global phenomenon, and Heidi's absolutely killing it worldwide in the best possible way, head and shoulders above others, because clinical team focus on what people need and just such a relentless pace to deliver those capabilities to the years past. So it's been delightful working with Tom and the team to bring some trust and confidence to a market that is understandably skeptical about its great functionality and capability. What does it mean to us from a risk perspective? And we've come a long way in the 2 years that this has been in market. To now the point, I don't think the risk is, can we trust it? The risk is that people are now becoming complacent about checking the notes because it's that good. What it means from me, the thing that I like best is, in my digital career, I introduced so many systems in healthcare that has put a barrier between the human and the delivery of healthcare. Now it's up to the stage in the UX where doctors are spending almost 2 hours on the computer for every hour they spend with patient care. Something's gone wrong. And now we're actually freeing people up from that administrative time, which means quality time with patients. That's what they got into digital health for. So super exciting time and absolute pleasure to see the phenomenon here in Australia, but also think about what it means for the whole world at large.
All right. So I basically connected with Tom on LinkedIn, and I'm a gynecologist. And initially I was like, Maud, we already have the Dragon, we dictate our letters to GP, go on day of service. I don't think that I was a bit skeptical, but I don't know if this is going to make any major, because I didn't know what an AI scribe could do or what it was. And by the evening of the first day when I used it, my eyes were like saucers. I was like, oh my God, this is like magic. And it obviously has been such a good journey overall, because in terms of your personal fatigue as a clinician, there is no doubt that it has reduced that for me and for my team. I'm very privileged to work in a multidisciplinary team. So that's the other interesting thing, how it's managed to meet the needs of so many different clinicians and also our administrative staff. So I'm very privileged to be an ambassador for Heidi Health. And another thing that really sort of was very special for me was historically, women's health has been so under-resourced. It's never been a priority. Can you believe that, drugs that were never tested on pregnant women until usually around the 1990s, even the mice in the lab were male. Okay, so that's the kind of history we have, the catch up that we have to do. So for me, I looked at digital technology and I thought, what, this is going to be the answer. Eventually, this is going to help leverage and create more equity, and so that we can, have things that are more purpose built for women. And so for me, and I'm very privileged to have had that trifecta of having a wonderful innovative company like Heidi, but also having our administrative staff that are digital natives, that are interested in sort of innovation. So I think that has been the catalyst for our practice, that you have clinicians that are opinionated. We may not be the best person to make the template, but there's someone in the practice that I can lean on and say, hey, Hakon, this tool has a capability. Do you mind doing this? And that's exactly what our practice at me did. So for example, there's some very standard like parameters of a normal period, for example, by FIGO, which is the International Gynecology Body. And our practice assistant took that and made it into a template. So suddenly, every patient is being documented in such a standardized way. And when they're coming back for follow-up, we're using the same tool. So I think Heidi has given us so many advantages in our documentation.
When I started to see the sprites coming out, I said, okay, which one of these ones can I try? It's rare that you find a product that has such a good fit for the market that suddenly it's just kind of exploding all around you. And in my personal practice, I have run a general nephrology clinic. I see maybe 3 to 6 people an hour in that clinic. And I used to get really anxious about going, there's so much work to do. I was going to get through that whole experience. The mental workload is like this for that 3-hour period. And then I can just kind of sit back, I'll do my 3 hours work at home and end it all. Unfortunately though, its growth is so viral and so many settings across, we've got 12,000 staff at the organisation, that I had to actually send them emails and they do or not to use it. Because we were trying to work out how we can do it safely inside a large organisation. A lot of people are using it in their private practices. Benefits are undeniable. And the stickiness of this technology, right? Once people get in their hands, that don't want to let it go.
I can see smile and light up about it too, which is really great to see. And there's a few threads I want to pull on. But I think we should start with safety and privacy, because that's obviously front of mind. And maybe, Simon, actually love to start with you. I think Microsoft's a company that's really built its reputation on trust. And I think we know that in healthcare, we've got to take these things really seriously. What's been your approach or observation about how maybe a company like Microsoft has kind of built that trust, not just from users, but the community at large, and maybe what you're seeing in terms of Heidi hopefully following in your footsteps and building those long-lasting, trusting relationships?
I first joined Microsoft in 2010, and they had a cloud, but the cloud was being run under the UX. And Microsoft had lots of lawyers. And they were of the opinion that it didn't contravene any laws. So just go convince people that it's okay to offshore data. That just wasn't kosher. And it resulted in us building data centers on Australian soil and making sure that those data centers complied with every legislation and jurisdictional certification that was out there. And it starts with the Australian privacy principles. And now that they say cross-border data flows are not okay unless you've got explicit information, consent from the patient, the organisation, where you are dealing with personally identified information. Super important. And even today, you don't think about it, but when you're using consumer grade models, you're sending your data offshore. So it's really important when we're dealing with sensitive health information, and that information is being used to potentially train someone else's model, that it is kept private, secure, and confidential. So that's why Microsoft is here today. I'm here because we're so proud to have Heidi as partners using the amazing technology that you have in our data tools, which deal with information for the Australian Secures Directorate all the way up to protected level information. The government trusts our data centres, and that's the sort of infrastructure that's behind the Heidi moderators. So we love the partnership. That's exciting. Privacy and confidentiality, super important, but for you using it, you should just have that peace of mind. You should just know that's there, it's baked in, and you can take it and use it.
Amazing. And to flip views down to the individual user, Talat, maybe how did you feel initially using it? Did you have any concerns, and maybe how did you get comfortable using Heidi?
Because I did my own as a Mayo clinician, what I felt was a deep dive, which was I tried to, understand HIPAA compliance. And I guess I sort of really wanted integration with the practice management software. My worst nightmare is entering patient data into the multiple parallel products. So I was very grateful that there was an integration between Heidi and our practice management software, which is cloud-based. So I felt, okay, fine, at least we're only entering the patient data once, and then we're using these products from a central source of truth, if I can put it that way. And then from a consenting point of view, we kind of put it on our website. We sort of literally shouted it from the rooftops. We put it on our website. We put it in our onboarding consent form for the patient. We have this massive sign in the reception that this is the... So we kind of made our system as opt-out. So now I don't actually verbally talk to every patient and say, well, can I use a Heidi? Because I basically think that, look, I've given you 4 coins of opting out. And to be honest, hardly anyone, I don't think even one of my patients has, in a practical sense, opted out. So, and I think in some ways, I'm hoping that if, let's say someone does have reservations about the way that is set up, that they will go onto the website and perhaps find alternate clinical providers that meet their needs. So we're quite confident of saying, look, we're clinicians, this is what we use, we're leaning on this because this is helpful not only for you, but for us.
Angus, you mentioned before kind of the juggling act that you have in your private practice versus your public roles. Maybe starting with your private practice, because it's a little bit simpler. How did you get comfortable? And maybe what's your view on how we get public health networks comfortable with rolling out Heidi?
I think there is an education piece at that sort of boardroom level around making sure people understand that not all AI is out to maliciously attack your systems. They're very worried about AI cybersecurity attacks, for instance. From the community perspective, though, it's about the level of trust and understanding the community has about AI in clinical practice as well. It starts with transparency and consent, and I think that's a really strong point that you made. So in 18 months, I've not had a patient say no either. I explicitly ask every consultation. It often leads to a little discussion. But the community concern, and I think about AI in the practice and scribes in particular, is low. So following those practice guidelines around consent the patient, you document that in a note. If you generate correspondence or include some sort of indication that you've used an OS5, but in the US that's mandated in some states and not in others, and they're all struggling, they're all different ones, but I think some standards are emerging about and that transparency builds trust. And I think the content also helps to build trust because you've got a much more authentic read with the whole session for the patient. And so I think as clinicians, we have a role to educate those libraries those that are helping to sign off on the contracts and decisions, your security risk assessments, the privacy impact assessments, all the things that we have to do to feel confident that we're not taking a risk.
And I want you to hold on to that, Mike, because I think something that you touched on before I want to kind of circle back to. I think the flip side of, we often talk about kind of privacy and security being table stakes to kind of play in this space. But then when we think about the impact that Heidi can have on your practice and almost the need for it. I remember when I first used it in the emergency room, it was like a very profound moment to go, oh my God, this is what I need. Like, this is the help I've needed to make the work a little bit more sustainable. Talk about that feeling on an individual level when you first started using Heidi. And
I think that the burnout issue in healthcare is very significant. And certainly in the public sector, a lot of effort has gone into making public sector more efficient. And that efficiency has increased the workload of the staff significantly. They're switching to tweak things differently. They digitize it badly, very extensively. And I'm not seeing many or anything really that lowers the competency load and makes the job as easy as all I've experienced easy play. It's a personal comment. But I reflect on the fact that so many of my colleagues are just banging down the door saying they want the same thing and can at least spend some money on it. If you come through medical school and you've used a scribe for all your consultations, what do you think about products? And what is important to you? We were talking about this recently, because those newer users have different expectations. And so you start to think, well, what will the long-term benefits be? Where will this technology take us? How is it going to help me? Is this just sort of like one big productivity gain, then we stop? Or are we going to get this sort of big leaps forward? And it's quite excited that don't know at the moment. But the workflow and the mental benefits have been really significant, and I enjoy making it a lot more.
it's good. It's nice to enjoy the work. Talat, I wanted to kind of continue pulling this thread a little bit and talk about kind of the relief as well as the enjoyment of the work. Because I think busy private practice, busy surgeon, what's that feeling been like in terms of just recognizing the change in your practice and how you've been feeling since using Heidi?
So I do feel that it has definitely reduced fatigue, and I've never looked into this many women's eyes, because we are constantly having to scribble and, prior to having Heidi. So I think it has really, really made me enjoy it. And because we don't know any different at that point, I used to think, oh, I'm so organized. We while the woman is changing to get onto the examination bed, I'm like, do you mind if I start dictating? So, but then I wasn't getting any break in that whole consult, whereas now I can be so present. And initially I felt that we needed to tweak it, and with time, and I think that's my other message I would give, is that be patient, because it honestly very quickly adopts to exotic accents, to all sorts of different workflows I'm finding, and it has been just amazing from that point of view. In terms of driving home, I'm often singing and humming, and I think that is a good sign. And I would say a lot of that is because of Heidi is not grumpy anymore when going into the car. And so I think it does. And the other place, apart from in consults, that I personally have noted, so we are, by the way, for context, I'm obsessed with management of heavy periods. And that is a quarter of reproductive age women, very common, often iron deficient, often very tired and exhausted when they come to us. So basically a huge unmet clinical need. So from that point of view, it has really sort of been that catalyst to be able to meet the needs of the women. And it really has served us so well from that point of view. But sorry, the point I was trying to get to was that in theatres, we have sort of created that template which also sort of delivers the MBS numbers of what we've done. And so not only does it again layer it in a very structured way, but immediately I'm done, I unscrub, I sort of huddle in the corner there in theatre and sort of dictate to the laptop, and it captures it. For the most part, we still get the odd MBS number that we need to correct, but for the most part, it's really doing a fabulous job.
Amazing. I think I want to steer the conversation a little bit to the other key stakeholder in all of this, which we've mentioned a little bit already, but to our patients and the community more broadly. It was the thing that I was most actually apprehensive about the first time I started using Heidi. And Talat, you mentioned that you've noticed a change in your practice, but have your patients noticed that change?
So our patients, I think, probably don't always know what the baseline is because we do a lot of episodic care. So they come, they get better. They often, it's not like endometriosis or some of the longer longitudinal journeys that in different aspects of women's health. But definitely we're feeling a very, a higher level anecdotally. We haven't done the research in this angle yet, asking the women specifically about this. But anecdotally, there's no doubt that, I think if your doctor is focused, is present, is actually concentrating, is looking at you, is making that eye contact, surely that has to be different from somebody just scribbling away and trying to make sure that they haven't forgotten something. The worst thing that happened to us recently is we have a lot of teaching as well. And so that's the other thing I must mention, that we usually have a medical student or someone in our team, a trainee registrar that is in the room physically. So I'm finding that this also makes it far more conversational, that everybody sort of almost is like a community around the patient, whereas it used to be very medical-ish, if I can put it that way. I don't know if I'm articulating it well, but it actually becomes a platform on which you can then layer teaching and training as well, because it's not, it makes it look almost like you're in the family room of the patient, because you're not actually doing any of the other multitasking things that you were doing previously.
So I spoke to Angus, I don't know if you remember this. This was back in December of 2023, and it really struck me. We're talking about scribes, and you said this phrase that just stuck in my mind. You said, "It brings back the joy of practice." And it just stuck with me. I'd never heard practicing medicine spoken of with joy, but
We're pretty jaded.
experience. And I guess what you're contrasting it against is the bureaucracy that goes hand in glove with delivering good care is good documentation. Well, now you can actually deliver good quality care and get the documentation as well. Look, because this is such a phenomenon, and because it's starting from the ground up rather than the top down, around the world, lots of organisations are looking for how do we justify the case for artificial scribes, and they're coming at it from a productivity lens. And there's lots of articles out there now that that's actually not the way to pick about it. It really is about how do you assist a workforce that's under pressure. There's never enough doctors, nurses, allied health, never enough time in the day to see all of the people. If we can cut that experience, if we can bring some of the joy of practice back again, that's the primary benefit. I'm also excited about what might come next as well.
Yeah, we're getting there. No, we're getting there.
For me, this is wave one. I'm really excited about where we might be able to go if we have structured information and analysed properly and using your interesting ways. Awesome.
I want to talk about how we maybe take that next step and that change in management and expectation management, and maybe from a community perspective, Simon, what do you think the best way to bring people along for the ride is? There's obviously a spectrum of people. Some people are really pro AI and excited by this in the community. Others are quite scared. But we need to kind of move together to kind of achieve, I think, the ultimate outcome that we all want. How would you suggest we get there?
When you hear Angus and Talat say that no one's saying, I don't want my doctor to use a device that helps with better quality note taking and allows a higher quality interaction, that's telling as well. So we should take that seriously, make sure that they're doing everything with the utmost care and responsibility to introduce it safely and confidentially and the rest of it. But at the same time, understand that there's demand both from the provider side and the patient side for a better experience and a higher quality level of care. I think those good news stories need to get out there too.
Awesome. And Angus, maybe you're caught in the middle. How do you approach kind of managing the expectations of individual clinicians that are banging down your door, but also, doing things slow enough to be confident that you're making the right decisions?
I think we realize increasingly that all the people around us are using AI. The way the technology is being adopted by that whole spectrum to the population so quickly builds confidence when you start talking about what the technology is. They have a such general understanding because they're starting to use it more and more. So that comfort is important. I think the health systems have some roles played in promoting and really leaning into the use of AI. You'll see that it will disrupt probably the any image-based sort of services like pathology and radiology. And in the community's mind, I don't think they see a lot of difference between the use of AI in these different settings. It's just that word AI, it's almost bringing up those connotations. I think we also need to develop some better guidelines for when it's useful to use, when it's not useful to use. If you're having a case conference about withdrawal of life support in ICU, and it's very, very different from talking about having it for leaking or even sort of complicated, sensitive topics. And I think we're not going to get there until people feel really comfortable that this is the best way to capture all of the nuances of that conversation. And I think those guidelines will emerge from practice reflecting the way people are using technology. They're not going to be sort of prescribed from above, down, shut, do it this way, because that never works. It really needs to reflect how people are using it in their daily practice. I think there is I saw a consumer guide was released for the use of AI scribes in practice the other day. I think we'll see a little bit more of that from consumer groups who want to understand it themselves and then use that to educate patients about scribes.
One thing I often wonder is walking through the hospital or in your clinic, you can see the quality of notes is not necessarily amazing, and particularly, particularly being working in emergency when you really need to know what's going on. Sometimes you're really found wanting. So, I mean, I wonder if it's a matter of just communicating that need, do you think, in terms of explaining to patients and the community, like, just how helpful, like, improved documentation can be as in addition to that time saving?
So yes, I think that's a very important point you've made, Ben. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is that patients that speak different languages, it's such a huge benefit to have Heidi in our practice. So one of the amazing GPs that work with me sometimes uses 3 or 2 languages at the same time. So she's got Heidi on for 3 different languages for the consult to English, because the patient or the partner may be speaking a different language. And we have applied for Gates Brand. We've gotten one Gates Brand originally, but then we've applied for another one specifically overseas for Urdu and Hindi. And again, I was very grateful that when I asked Heidi about the support letter and support for us to take it overseas, that was forthcoming. So I think it's very important that when we're looking at our communities, that no one gets left behind, and that this is the technology that can help us, minimize those barriers that we know that exist for so many populations.
I was also kind of reflecting on kind of innovation in healthcare generally. And I think, the pandemic is a relatively recent example of, we do a pretty good job as clinicians to adapting our practice to research or new treatment techniques or modalities, appear and they're adopted quite quickly. Do you think we maybe are selling ourselves short or overthinking the transition to AI in terms of just overthinking it and maybe not or underestimating how good we are at adapting our practice to new technologies or treatments?
And one thing I've observed about Scribe is they don't strictly follow that technology adoption curve. You also got people who you'd think would be sort of squarely in that sort of like middle group who adopted a bit later, but they're busy. You're under pressure here adopting that technology more quickly that you would expect. And so I think we'll continue to observe some of those changes. It's almost every medical conference has a little session on AI and scribes, and so that's the way you get knowledge out to the community, and everyone wants to talk about it, and that's really, I think, building confidence. And I feel like a new drug, you just gotta try it a couple of times and use it, and then you build your own confidence, and your heuristics about the way you practice starts to change as well. So I don't think that it's gonna be too many barriers, and I think a strong endorsement from health systems that we avoid for the sort of enterprise stuff, but people in private practice are already really making its decisions themselves. Right?
So we are alpha testing a Heidi Health AI empowered digital reception, and part of what we want to do is almost like, because it's a pathway that we've created, we're looking at the points at which that could advantage the patient's care, and including, like, let's say a post-operative patient, how can we check in on her perhaps 2 days after, is she okay? And just that compassion and that just that and also from a health safety point of view, we wanted systems that are robust. And so I feel that this is going to be the future. Really, it's running so fast that we're struggling to keep up with the good things that we come in. I keep saying to Tom, that is your Santa for us.
I think we are overthinking it. And here's why. When I was a JNO, when I was an intern, I'd go see the patient and I'd go present the case back to an ED senior, a reg. And then when I was an SRMO, I would have juniors take their history and present it to me. I think we can think about the notes that come out of an AI Sprite like that. JMO and someone else has taken the notes, happen to be me, someone else has written them up. I'm going to review them with that level of critical appraisal. So it's actually a heuristic we're familiar with. And I think that's a nuance that probably some of the non-clinicians don't appreciate. They're like, oh, we're putting this dramatic new technology, we're fundamentally changing things. But that's the way it's always been.
We've had a very medical sort of perspective on things, but I think that nursing, particularly senior nurses who do a lot of manual documentation in our health system at the moment, and allied health, are huge sort of sleeper groups that have some real productivity opportunities, that sort of surprise and delight and joy of coming back into practice, if we can start to take away some of the burden of very manual data entry. And particularly allied health, there's often some very specific measurements, assessments that are done, and they're quite complicated to document down. And they're often groups that don't get the investment from the health system in systems to help them to do their job, and they're very understaffed. So I think that there's a huge opportunity in nursing and allied health, and they're often very key partners for the medical teams. And so how we work together, how we work in these sort of multidisciplinary settings is another massive opportunity that's just ready for us to have a look at.
Couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing that you mentioned in your initial answer was research and evidence. I think it's a really pertinent point. One of the challenges with the new technology is good research takes time, and also, we saw this week GPT-5 was released and the models are evolving so quickly, which can sometimes make the research very quickly become outdated. I guess, what's your take on the research that you've seen in terms of Scribe's impact on practice and outcomes, but also what's Heidi's role in that, and how do we continue to contribute?
There's enormous interest. In fact, it's sort of driven a lot of the conversations from clinicians is, I've got this study, I've got $30,000, it's testing Scribes versus usual practice. And the holdup, I really pity anyone who's trying to do research on new technology inside a big health system. It's very slow to get around to it, and I've had that experience myself. But there's a real hunger to understand and measure the benefits. There is an element, I think, of the march of technology. This is coming anyway. Everyone's using it, and we're not going to hold back that usage until we understand and measure all the benefits and have sort of reported that. But I think as we get deeper and deeper into practice and workflow, more embedded, we're starting to change the way people think in their consultations. We're changing the way that we operate. We really do need to understand that at a deeper level. And I think one of those questions might be, how do Scribes change the way someone practices? Not necessarily just helping them do their job and be better versions of themselves, but be perhaps a different kind of specialist in the future. I think the economics also need to be carefully looked at as well. We need to have that return on investment. We need the chief executives and the CIOs and the CFOs to be comfortable signing off that this is really worthwhile technology at scale. The research I've seen to date is mostly small scale. It's individual organizations. There's some sort of amusement aspects sometimes, but the evidence is that the way it's writing, the scribes in general, they're generally more empathic probably than we are normally in our writing. It's certainly more detailed. Maybe we don't need all the detail, but it's definitely detailed. Cognitive load is lowered in the consultations, and patient satisfaction with the answers is higher. And so it's still small scale. I think the evidence is very strong that these scribes are really improving the health system.
Research is about getting enough high-quality data, and that's been a constraint. And then it's having the horsepower to analyse that information in there. It took me 2 weeks when I was a JMO to do this tiny study for the last 5 years, of the motor vehicle accidents that came through the emergency department, how many of them actually had a blood alcohol level score taking. These days, it's not a human that needs to run around or paper files and scans through them. We've got this incredible knowledge intelligence engine. So some stats from the World Health Organization: hospitals around the world each year produce 50 petabytes of data, and 97% of that is never used again. I would like to think now that we've got this capability, we can unlock what has historically been operational up, that's kept for longitudinal reasons or medico-legal reasons, and instead that becomes an engine to improve the care that we're doing through insights and holding the mirror up to us.
Amazing. I think that is a nice lead into the next thing I wanted to kind of bring into the discussion. Is we often hear kind of, superlatives like transformative or revolutionary and things like that. We're talking about technology. And I think, I think back to like the promise of the electronic health record, and that was meant to kind of solve all of our problems and things like that. So there's probably understandably a level of skepticism, but how do we actually realize the potential impact that, scribes and AI generally in healthcare can have in terms of solving some pretty big interoperability problems and the way we kind of communicate with each other and things like that? It's a big question, but how do we get this right?
Right, no, I had a go at this. I've seen some transformative waves in my time. So the first was the internet. The second was mobility. And with it came apps. And those were 2 disruptive legs. You should be skeptical. I've seen ones that didn't take off. So I see mixed and virtual reality, that still remains mesh, and blockchain. It's 100 times place in that. This is, I think, a transformational societal point. This point in time, we talked about the iPhone moment in 2008. This is the iPhone moment for our society at large. And the question is, how do we in the healthcare industry apply it to the most pressing problems that we have? I think one of the most pressing problems we have is workforce. How do we enable this incredible resource that we've got to scale it to the demand of all over the place? So I think that's one of the most urgent problems. In our developed world, that's great. We've got lots of patients and we can provide more care that's higher quality scale. But I think about what that means for the developed world. I really think this is a potent technology that will fundamentally change it. I think it's really tough.
I've been appointed recently as Australia's representative at a committee called FIGO, which is the Global Gynecology Body and Society, and in the Menstrual Health Committee. So I think that what you've made, the point about this being international and global, and we really need to keep that lens of developing countries as well included in this, is so important. And as far as our own research is concerned, we're very interoperability focused. In the pathway, we basically mapped out all the possible permutations of a woman through our practice and where are our pain points. And some of the pain points are so basic, they're interoperability woes. And for example, even something like coding, we were just speaking earlier, that clinicians are not taught, at least I wasn't taught how to code or the value of coding, especially in the community, in a private context. So, I ended up we've seen thousands of women through our door through the abnormal bleeding hub. but I can't tell you how many of them had heavy bleeding, how many of them had bleeding between periods, for example. And so it was not until, and now Heidi is actually doing that as part of our documentation, but the manual, the manual load on coding, if you go through what the practice management software option is actually quite a lot, because you've got to manually go in and add it in. So I think that this is going to create a lot of efficiencies and ability to standardize care.
We want to make sure that we get that return on investment. This means really investing in a clinical practice, continuing to measure its usage and make sure it remains well adopted, integrating it where possible to smooth people's workflows so there's less of that copy paste or manually moving information around that might otherwise go astray, and then to really scale it across the whole the health system. Ironically, I think the way scribes work, it sort of takes away the knowledge burden, and you can focus a little more on the physical skills, like physical examination. So maybe we'll do a bit more of it, be better at it, right? That intern story, I mean, I just think about, I'm sure everyone's got this experience. You work with someone who's taking notes for you, and you may track them, but I don't know, you may not have time to track them, or you want to have time careful or something. And then you read the distro summary, you suddenly realize that you understand all the cool things of the whole sort of journey, and you got the strategy of the treatment plan in your mind. You're like, oh, have I not communicated that well? Or have I not documented it well along the way? I think that standard documentation is going to improve dramatically, and the relationships of team members inside hospitals will probably change just as a result of that.
More teaching, maybe a bit more kindness, a bit more time saving.
And I also think then that what I find is very helpful is like an action plan for the patient, because research shows that or patients do not remember, they remember only a very small fraction of the consultation that they have with their clinicians. And when we just give them the letter to the GB as a copy is actually not very ideal, because we want to give them an action plan in a way that they can understand and that is prioritized and that is actually focusing on the part that is relevant to them. So I think this is another place where we're going to see huge changes in terms of making information more acceptable and presented in a way that is patient friendly.
We've spoken a lot about scribes and kind of how we've got here and the challenges facing us in the next little, in the next moment in time, I guess. But we're really excited to be pushing beyond scribes and launching calls and tasks and even coding. I know it's not sexy, but we need to pay for the healthcare that we're given, and like you say, the dollars and cents need to really add up for this to work and be sustainable. What's most excites you about thinking kind of beyond AI scribes, where else AI could play and have real impact?
As incredible as the clinic note is, I think it's got to hand it to Tom and the product team to see through that to the next generation of where CAGU sits. In addition to the note, I think about all these secondary documentation artifacts, whether it's a work cover certificate or a referral or a discharge summary letter, all that sort of stuff. So much of what we do is recycle the same information into different outputs. Once you collect it once, that should be something that just becomes automated. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited that now we have better quality documentation, and with better quality documentation and the ability to reason across that, I love the insights that we might be able to get out of that. I think about the administrative side. So we talk about patient. Who's got time to write up a decent patient summary, let alone an actions plan? But now we can do that. I mean, we're very good at checking someone else's work. I mean, you could do that quickly if someone else has broken the back of it. When we automate all this, these are high value, also high effort tasks for humans to do. If we can automate that function, we can actually unlock so much value. We have this fragmented health system. This is the sort of thing that can bring it all together, and the power that happens when you start to aggregate all of those silos together. We'll be able to do so much better things for the patients that we serve. Yeah, I think it's going to raise our costs.
I think for us, the Heidi Health has formed part of the digital infrastructure or the ecosystem within which care is provided. And so there's a physical philosophy in the multidisciplinary team that, you could have a corridor consult and check in and value skills from other clinicians. But the technology actually empowers and enables that to happen. And so we're using, and for me, the future is where, at the start of it, the patient gets appropriate information that they can process in an easy way and with pros and cons, because my typical consult is a space where we're spoiled for choice. We have a number of options, and it's for example, might give them a standard pamphlet from our college, which is a wonderful pamphlet on heavy bleeding. But I'm giving the 14-year-old girl the same pamphlet digitally, and also the 47-year-old mother for the same pamphlet. So this will allow us to standardize, and I'm very excited about that personalizing care, to be able to give patients more detail about what is relevant to them rather than something generic, go and read this, So I think that's very important for the future.